Hello, and thank you for joining me for Storytime with Mr. C. I am Mr. C, and for my regular listeners, welcome back. Thank you so much for sticking it out with me. For those of you tuning in for the first time, welcome to the show, and if you like what you hear, please go check out my first 6 episodes. Here on Storytime with Mr. C, I will be sharing stories that I have written, or a friend or family member of mine has written, or maybe even something you have written. If you would like for me to share one of your stories here on Storytime with Mr. C, get your story or stories ready to go, and shoot me an email at storytimewithmisterc@gmail.com. I have put this email down in the description for you to hopefully make it easier. For now, I'm going to ask that you please keep stories to a maximum of 2,000 words. And please, for now, keep them family friendly. And maybe, just maybe, I will read your story or stories on some of my future episodes. As always, a big, huge thank you to my buddy Russ for helping me out with my intro music. Russ is the bassist for local band Drive By High Five. If you ever get the opportunity to check them out, please do. Also, as always, big, huge thanks to Ben over at Chasing the Whimsy. You can find the link to his podcast down in the description as well. Please go check that out. Show him some love. Thank you, Ben, again and always for your continued support. For this, our 7th episode, I will be sharing the next chapter from my stories about my father. And as of right now, I intend to continue with these stories from Father Allen for at least the next few weeks, and then I might throw in another spooky story. I don't know. We shall see. Drop me a comment or shoot me an email and let me know your thoughts on these 2 different types of stories. Which do you prefer? Let me know, please. All right, folks. Enough babbling. Here we go with episode 7. Stand by.
Storytime with Mr. C. Storytime.
Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of Storytime with Mr. C. This is the next chapter in my collection of stories I wrote about my father. This is The Moose Lodge, Part 1, from Father Allen. The Moose Lodge was a building located on the little stretch of Wilmot Road between Pima and Grant in Tucson, Arizona. It's now home to a construction company. But back when it was Moose Lodge number 747, it housed a bar, a dance floor, kitchen, dining area, game room, office, and even a room in the back that doubled as the kids' movie theater and the adults' game of chance room. It was a grand place indeed, and it was here that my father often met and mingled with his fellow brothers in the Fraternal Order of the Moose. Moose lodges are still around. We have 3 here in Tucson, and these lodges and their members serve to, quote, focus on community involvement and support for children, seniors, and their local communities, end quote. I don't know if it is still the case, but at the time, the Moose Lodge also enthusiastically supported the use of the Majesty, that was the Citizens Band Radio, also known simply as the CB radio. These things were cell phones before cell phones existed. We always had one of these short-distance 2-way radios in whichever vehicle my father had adopted as his own, along with a sweet whip antenna, or maybe 2, and we usually had at least one other radio somewhere in the house. The whole family even had CB handles. My father was known as Cut Up. My mom was Patch Up, my sister was Annabelle, and I was Cuddlebug. I can remember being tasked with operating the radio while my father drove, especially if we were on some sort of road trip. Being able to talk to the guy in the big, huge semi that was right next to us was pretty awesome. I even remember some of the CB lingo, I think. My father brought me and my sister along with him to the Moose Lodge often enough that we were considered regulars. We would sit at the bar drinking Fresca or Shirley Temples with extra cherries while my father gabbed with the other moose. The dimly lit lodge felt almost magical to me, with the constant chatter and laughter of happy adults, the smoky haze of countless cigarettes filling the air, and the occasional pat on my head from one of my father's brethren. I had an all-access pass to the entirety of the space, and it was not unusual for me to visit whomever was behind the bar. I'd go check the kitchen for some snacks, or maybe swing by the office for a butterscotch or a peppermint candy. I was only in my single digits, but I always felt big and important whenever we visited the lodge. I remember thinking there were a whole bunch of other mooses or meese as a group, but I can't remember very many of them individually. One of my father's brother moose, who I definitely remember, though, was a man who I only ever knew as Tiny. Tiny was the only person I knew who was bigger than my father. An absolute monolith of a man who always wore dark glasses and constantly chewed on cigars. Tiny always treated me well. And he totally looked like the Kingpin from the Daredevil comics. I don't know exactly what Tiny did at the Moose Lodge, but he definitely seemed to be in some position of authority. Along with being one of Tucson's best barbers, my father was also known as a damn good cook. So it was not uncommon for them to pull him into the kitchen where he would prepare pot roasts, chicken fried steak, baked potatoes, and other comfort foods. My sister and I would even get the occasional job back there in the kitchen, too, where we would peel potatoes or maybe move dishes from one place to another, but that would usually only last until we got bored and had to move on to some other adventure. We would pry quarters away from my father as often as we were able to so we could go load up the jukebox that sat at one end of the bar. Pretty sure the Devil Went Down to Georgia, C.W. McCall's Convoy, and that theme from the Dukes of Hazzard were the only songs we ever picked. Often we would have these same songs playing over and over for the entire duration of our visit. Pretty sure the moose must have loved us for that. Another fine way to spend our father's hard-earned quarters was in the game room. We would play pinball and Space Invaders until our eyes nearly fell out of our heads. My sister was usually much better at them than I was. The game room also had a pool table, but I wasn't any good at that one, so I usually just watched. Sometimes I would watch real close. On one occasion, two young men were in the midst of a very serious round of knocking the little colored balls all over the green felt table, and I could see this game was very important, so I was paying very close attention on how they lined up their shots. I was hoping to pick up some pointers, so I positioned myself behind one of the players as he studied the table. He bent over, slid the cube between his chalked fingers, paused for a moment, and BAM! He pulled back on the cue and jammed it directly into my right eye. My hand shot up to my face as I staggered back, and the two men continued their game as if nothing had happened. I don't think he even knew he hit me. I wobbled to the bathroom and climbed up on the sink to get a good look at the trauma. Stared into the mirror expecting blood to be gushing from an empty socket, or maybe even the end of the cue would still be sticking out of my head. But my injuries were much less exciting. My eye was bloodshot, teary, and a little rosy around the edges, but it was still there. I sat on the sink and blinked several times to make sure that everything still worked, and then went in search of my father. After locating him, we snagged some food from the kitchen, made our way home. I decided not to tell him about my eye for fear that he might try to kill the pool-playing men, but once we got home, the secret was out. "What the hell is that?" I looked up to see my father eyeing me as if someone had taken a crap right on my nose. "What?" I asked, trying to look away. My father grabbed me by the face and leaned in. "What the hell happened to your eye?" "Nothing. What?" "Who hit you?" "Nobody. What?" I pulled away from his grasp and scurried into the bathroom. I hadn't known that a rosy, bloodshot eye could turn into a black eye. Right side of my face had gotten nice and puffy, and lovely shades of red and purple had started to creep across my pale skin. As I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, my father stepped into the doorway. He asked me again about who had hit me, and I finally shared the story of what had actually happened. My father smirked, chuckled lightly, and shook his head. "Your first black eye," he said, with a touch of pride in his voice. He led me into the kitchen and gave me a bag of some frozen vegetable to hold against my face as we sat down for our meal of pot roast and veggies. The food was amazing, and as much as my eye hurt, I do remember this as one of the good times with my father. Thank you so much for joining me for this 7th episode of Storytime with Mr. C. That was The Moose Lodge, Part 1, from Father Allen, my collection of stories about my father. I will be reading you the next story from Father Allen next week, and that will be available on Sunday, the 24th of August. And again, drop me a comment or an email. Let me know which of the stories you prefer, Father Allen or the spooky stuff. Tell me which ones you want to hear more of, please. In the meantime, go check out Ben's podcast, Chasing the Whimsy. And if you can find Drive-By High Five out there in the wilds of Tucson, please go check them out. Thanks again for hanging out and listening to my story. Hope you come on back for the next one. Until then, take care. Be safe.